In the ruins of a world once teeming with life, Zora wandered alone, her footsteps the only sound in the vast emptiness. She had been abandoned by her people, her civilization destroyed in a brutal conflict that had left nothing but crumbling buildings and shattered dreams. The alien girl, once part of a thriving society, now found herself as the last of her kind, wandering the desolate streets in search of something that might restore the hope she had lost long ago. Zora was not like the humans she had heard of, through stories. Her long emerald green hair and pointed ears marked her as different. Her species had been sophisticated and powerful, but now there was nothing left but decay. The world around her reflected the devastation she felt inside. A once beautiful planet, now a shadow of its former self. The once proud cities were in ruins, with rusted metal and scattered debris lying where once there had been bustling markets and vibrant life. Now there were only reminders of the past, a past that no longer mattered. She had tried to find others of her kind, but there were no signs of life, no more conversations, no more laughter. Just the eerie silence that accompanied the end of an era. Zora's heart ached as she moved through the deserted streets. She had been rejected by her own people, cast aside when they saw no use for her. The pain of that rejection still gnawed at her, but she had learned to push it aside. In this barren wasteland, survival was all that mattered. But despite her strength and her will to endure, Zora couldn't escape the loneliness that surrounded her like an ever-present shadow. Every corner she turned, every empty building she entered, served as a constant reminder that she was alone in the world. She had always been a fighter. Her people had taught her that. But even the strongest of beings could only endure so much isolation before they began to break. Zora's gaze fell to the ground, her thoughts weighed down by the heavy burden of loneliness. She had once believed she was meant for greatness, but now, with nothing left but the ruins of her past, she began to wonder if that was ever true. Was she truly meant to survive, or was she simply a remnant of a forgotten world? Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound, a soft, rhythmic thud that echoed in the silence. Zora froze, her senses immediately alert. She had been so absorbed in her own sorrow that she hadn't noticed the approaching figure. The sound grew louder, and she turned toward it, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape. The thudding grew louder still, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the ground reached her ears. A figure emerged from behind the rusted ruins, and Zora's heart skipped a beat. The sight of a human, a creature she had never expected to encounter on this forsaken planet, shocked her to her core. His silhouette was tall and imposing, and his movements were steady and purposeful. He wore a long coat that fluttered in the wind, his steps purposeful, and he seemed to have no fear of the desolate world that surrounded him. For a moment, Zora stood frozen, her body tense with both curiosity and fear. It had been so long since she had seen another living being, let alone a human. She had heard stories of humans, their strength, their courage, and their ability to survive in even the harshest environments. But never had she imagined one would venture into the abandoned wastelands of her world. She watched, hidden in the shadows of an old building as the human drew closer. His eyes scanned the area, and Zora could see that he was searching for something, perhaps another survivor or maybe something else. But she couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something about his presence that intrigued her, something that made her feel a flicker of hope, however faint. Zora's breath caught in her throat. Was he here to help? Or was he just another intruder, someone who would abandon her like the others? She couldn't bring herself to trust him, not yet. After all, she had been betrayed before, left to wander in the ruins with no one to care for her. She wasn't about to let herself get hurt again. Not again, but there was something in his eyes, a softness that seemed out of place in the cold, empty world they now shared. As he moved closer, Zora felt a strange sensation in her chest, a pull she couldn't explain. It was as though, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't just another forgotten soul lost in the void. For a brief moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to not be alone, to have someone, anyone, care about her. Before she could retreat further into the shadows, the human stopped. He stood motionless for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the ruined city. Zora, unsure of what to do, remained where she was, her heart racing. What did he want? Was he here to take her? Or had he come to the same conclusion as her people had, that she was of no use? Just when Zora thought she couldn't take the suspense anymore, the human took a step forward, moving directly toward the area where Zora was hiding. She gasped, her hand instinctively reaching for a piece of metal debris ready to defend herself if needed. But then, something unexpected happened. The human spoke. "Are you here?" His voice was low, but it carried a warmth that seemed to fill the empty streets. "I know you're out there. I won't hurt you. I just want to talk." Zora's heart skipped a beat. Could it be true? Could this human, this stranger, actually care? Her mind raced. Should she trust him? Or was she walking into yet another painful betrayal? She had been abandoned before, but perhaps, just perhaps, this time would be different. With a deep breath, Zora stepped out of the shadows. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope. Zora stepped cautiously from the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes never left the human, watching him closely, uncertain if this encounter would bring more hurt or some form of solace. She had waited so long for a sign, a spark of hope. But was this truly it? She felt an unexplainable pull toward him, a sense of something good and kind. But could she trust it? Could she trust him? The human stood still, his back straight, as though sensing her movement even though he didn't turn immediately. Zora's feet felt as though they were made of lead, but she pushed herself forward, stepping into the faded sunlight of the ruined street. The air was thick with the dust of ages, and every breath felt heavy in her lungs. Still, she stepped closer, one foot after the other, until there was no more distance between them. Her heart was beating so fast it felt as though it might burst from her chest. She clenched her fists at her sides, ready to defend herself if she had to. As she got closer, she could finally make out more details of the human. His face was young, perhaps in his 20s, and his eyes seemed kind. Not the cold, calculating eyes she had seen in the few humans she had encountered before, but something softer, warmer. He didn't look like he belonged in this broken world. There was a quiet strength about him, as though he had seen hardship, but it hadn't hardened him. The man finally turned his head, and their gazes locked. For a moment, Zora couldn't move. She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to expect from him. Would he be like all the others? Would he show fear, disgust, or would he simply walk away, as if she were nothing more than a shadow in the ruins? But the human did not turn away. He looked at her with curiosity, his expression unreadable, and then, to Zora's surprise, he smiled. A small, hesitant smile, but a smile nonetheless. "I knew I wasn't alone," he said softly as though speaking to himself. "You're the last, aren't you?" Zora's heart skipped a beat at his words. The last? She wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't sure if she should say anything or if she should run, retreat back to the safety of the shadows where she was used to hiding. The human didn't wait for a response. He stepped forward cautiously, holding out his hand, as though offering a gesture of peace. "My name's Jake," he said. "I've been traveling for a while now, looking for something." Zora hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to be careful. No one had ever offered her kindness like this before, and the thought of trusting someone, anyone, was terrifying. But as her gaze locked with Jake's, something deep within her stirred. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe, just maybe, this human was different. "I'm Zora," she managed to say, her voice shaky. The words felt strange, as though she hadn't spoken in years. Her own name seemed so foreign, so distant, as though it didn't even belong to her anymore. Who was she now? The last of her kind, lost in a world that no longer cared for her. Jake's smile widened. Zora, he repeated, as if tasting her name on his tongue. It's nice to meet you. I've been traveling a long time and I haven't met anyone, let alone someone like you. I've been looking for survivors, looking for answers, but I never expected to find you. Zora looked at him, feeling a strange sensation bubble up inside her. She couldn't tell if it was hope or fear, but it was there, making her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But she couldn't. Not yet. She had been let down too many times before, and her heart was too fragile to risk more pain. Jake seemed to sense her hesitation, and his smile softened. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, lowering his hand slowly, giving her space. I know you've been alone for a long time, but I'm here to help, if you'll let me. Zora didn't know what to say. She was torn. Everything inside her wanted to run, to retreat to the safety of her solitude. But there was a voice deep inside her, a voice she had long forgotten that whispered maybe. Maybe this was the change she had been waiting for. Maybe this human, this stranger, wasn't like the others. Maybe he really meant what he said. Her eyes flickered to the ground, her mind racing. She had been abandoned, cast aside like trash. Her people had left her to fend for herself in this broken world. Why would anyone care about her now? Why would anyone want to help someone like her? The pain of those memories threatened to overtake her, but she pushed them down, forcing herself to focus on the present. The human, Jake, was still standing there, waiting for her response. She began, her voice trembling. Why would you help me? I'm nothing, I have nothing left. Jake shook his head, his eyes gentle. That's not true, you're not nothing, you're someone, you're important. Zora's breath caught. Important. The word sounded so foreign to her, like a dream she hadn't dared to believe in for so long. Jake stepped forward once more, his movements slow and deliberate. You don't have to be alone anymore, he said softly. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Zora's heart twisted painfully in her chest, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, ashamed of her weakness. But Jake didn't seem to mind. He didn't judge her. Instead, he simply stood there, waiting. In that moment, something shifted inside Zora. A small, fragile seed of hope began to grow, just enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, this human was different. Maybe, for the first time, someone cared. She looked up at Jake, meeting his gaze. What do we do now? Jake smiled again, this time with more warmth. Now, we start over, he said. Together. Zora felt a small smile tug at her lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, it felt like she wasn't alone anymore. As the days passed, Zora and Jake's connection deepened, and what had started as a fleeting encounter began to evolve into something stronger, something neither of them had expected. The desolate city that had once felt so empty and cold now seemed less hostile with the human by her side. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Zora allowed herself to relax. She didn't have to be on edge all the time. She didn't have to wonder when the next betrayal would come. Jake was kind in ways she hadn't thought humans could be. He didn't treat her like a strange alien or an outcast. He didn't see her differences. He saw her. Zora's world, once filled with loneliness and despair, was slowly starting to change. Each morning, Jake would wake up early and bring food, whatever he could find from the remains of old stores or supplies that hadn't yet rotted away. He didn't mind scavenging, and Zora was surprised at how resourceful he was. She had expected him to turn back when he found out how harsh this world was. But instead, Jake embraced it. He adapted quickly, showing Zora a kind of strength she had never seen before. They would sit together on the cracked pavement of the ruined city, eating their meager meals in silence at first. But then, over time, they began to talk more. Jake told her about his life, about the places he had traveled to and the people he had met. He shared stories of Earth, of bustling cities, of bright lights, of music and laughter. Zora listened, enraptured, as she had never heard such stories before. In the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of dream. Was it possible that a human cared about her? Zora, too, began to open up, albeit reluctantly. She shared what she remembered of her world, of her people, and of the vast knowledge her species had once possessed. But the more she talked about her past, the more she felt the weight of loss crushing her. Her people were gone, their cities reduced to ashes. All the advancements they had made, all the beauty they had created, it no longer existed. She had been abandoned, left behind, as the last of her kind. And now there was only this cold, forgotten world, with nothing left but remnants of a past that no longer mattered. Jake noticed the sadness in her eyes, and though he didn't fully understand her pain, he offered the only thing he could, his presence. He never pushed her to speak more than she wanted, never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. He simply sat with her, watching the world around them. And in the quiet moments, Zora realized that perhaps that was all she needed. Just someone who was there without judgment, without expectation. One afternoon, Jake brought out a small book he had found in one of the ruined buildings. A book of stories, something to pass the time. It was old, yellowed with age, and some pages were torn, but it was something. As he flipped through it, Zora watched, intrigued. She had never seen anything like it before. To her, books were a form of magic, a way to keep stories alive, even when everything else was lost. "What is this?" she asked, her voice soft. "A book," Jake replied, smiling. "It's full of stories. I thought you might like to hear one." He began to read aloud, the words flowing from his mouth with ease. The story was simple, a tale of adventure and friendship, but it was enough to captivate Zora. As she listened to his voice, she felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't known she was missing. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like an outcast. She didn't feel like the last of her kind. In that moment, she was just a listener, lost in the words of a human who cared enough to share a story. Over time, their days settled into a rhythm. Jake would go out in the mornings, searching for supplies or exploring the ruins, while Zora spent the time reflecting on her past or helping him as much as she could. They would meet in the afternoons, share their findings, and talk about their hopes, however small those hopes might be. Zora began to realize something that she had never allowed herself to consider before. She was starting to care about Jake. The feeling was subtle at first, an unspoken connection, a flicker of warmth that would bloom in her chest whenever he smiled at her, or when their hands brushed together by accident. It was like a small light had been reignited within her, a light that she had long buried in the ashes of her sorrow. Jake, too, began to open up more. He had been through his own struggles, his own battles to survive. But with Zora, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he had been missing. She was different from anyone he had ever met. There was no bitterness or anger in her, just a quiet strength that came from having survived so much. He admired her resilience, her ability to keep going even in the face of such overwhelming loss. One day, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the ruins, Jake looked at Zora with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Zora, I think we're more alike than we think. We've both lost a lot, but we're still here. We're still fighting." Zora met his gaze, her heart swelling at his words. "I never thought of it that way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was the last of my kind, the last of everything I knew." "You're not alone anymore," Jake said firmly. "You have me, and you'll always have me." Zora felt a lump rise in her throat at his words. Could it really be true? Could she really trust him with her heart? She wasn't sure, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, Zora felt something that she thought had died with her people. Hope. It wasn't a grand hope, not yet, but it was something. A small flickering light in the darkness that reminded her that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her after all. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shadows, Zora found herself looking toward tomorrow, no longer dreading the unknown but eager to see where this bond with Jake might take her. The days had passed in a delicate rhythm, each one building upon the last like the steady beat of a drum. Zora and Jake had grown closer, their bond becoming something unspoken, yet undeniable. But as the quiet days turned to weeks, a storm began to brew on the horizon, a storm neither of them had seen coming. It all started one evening when Jake came back from his daily trek through the ruins, his face etched with worry. Zora was sitting on the edge of an old wall, watching the fading light as it cast long shadows across the land. She had grown accustomed to the silence of their world, but tonight there was an unmistakable tension in the air. "Zora," Jake said quietly, his voice almost strained. "There's something I need to tell you." Zora looked up, sensing the shift in his tone. She could tell something was wrong. Her stomach tightened in apprehension. "What is it, Jake?" Jake hesitated, his eyes scanning the desolate streets behind him, as if searching for something, anything, that would offer him the courage to say what was weighing on his mind. "I've found something," he said finally, his voice low. "A group of survivors. They're coming. They've been tracking me, looking for a way to rebuild. They want me to bring them to you." Zora's heart skipped a beat. She had lived so long in isolation that the thought of anyone else coming into her world, into their world, was almost too much to bear. The silence she had come to accept, the peace she had found with Jake, was suddenly shattered. "Survivors?" Zora echoed, her voice trembling. "Why would they want to come here? What do they want with me?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I don't know, Zora, but they're coming. I can't stop them, and they know about you, about your people." Zora's mind raced. Her people, her civilization, her legacy was long gone. The thought of anyone knowing about her past was too much to process. She felt a wave of panic rise within her chest. What did they want with her? Would they see her as some kind of relic, a reminder of a lost time? Or worse, would they want to use her for something else? Jake's voice broke through her thoughts. "Zora, we have a choice to make. We can stay here, where we're safe, where it's just us, or we can go with them. They might have a way to rebuild, a chance for something better." The weight of his words pressed down on her. Zora had never thought beyond survival. She had never imagined a future where there was more than just the day-to-day struggle. But now, with Jake's offer before her, everything seemed possible. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to life than just existing. Could she find a place in this new world? Could she find a purpose? But as the idea of rebuilding, of finding a new community, stirred something deep inside her, another feeling began to rise. Fear. Fear of what they might ask of her. Fear of being seen as nothing more than an alien oddity. The memories of rejection, of being cast aside by her own people, surged back. She had been abandoned once before. Could she trust these strangers? Could she trust Jake's offer of a new beginning? Zora stood up, her mind spinning with conflicting thoughts. "I don't know, Jake," she said, her voice shaky. "I've been alone for so long. I've built walls around myself to protect my heart. What if they just use me? What if I'm just a reminder of what's gone? I don't know if I can trust them." Jake stepped closer, his eyes soft with understanding. He reached out and gently took her hand. "I'm not asking you to trust them, Zora. I'm asking you to trust me. Whatever happens, I'll be by your side. You don't have to do this alone." The warmth of his hand in hers, the sincerity in his voice, was enough to calm her racing heart. Zora closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She had spent so much of her life hiding, running, afraid of trusting anyone. But now, in this moment, she realized that maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to step into the light, even if it was scary. Zora took a deep breath, her gaze lifting to meet Jake's. "What if it's a mistake? What if we go and it's all just another lie?" Jake squeezed her hand. "Then we'll leave. Together. No matter what happens, we stick together. The uncertainty lingered, but there was something else in her chest now. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her. A future where she wasn't alone. A future where she could be more than just the last of her kind. "Okay," Zora said finally, her voice steady. "Let's go. But we do this together. No more running." Jake's face lit up with relief. "We'll go together. I promise. You." The two of them stood there hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world before them was uncertain, full of unknowns, but for the first time in a long while, Zora felt like she wasn't standing alone in the dark. There was a future ahead, a new beginning. And as long as they had each other, she knew they could face whatever came next. With Jake by her side, Zora stepped into the unknown, ready to face the world that awaited them, no longer afraid to take that first step into a new chapter of her life. For Minnie,